Christmas is known as the season of peace and love. But for some people, what should be a time of joy has turned into a real nightmare. Today, we will share 3 true stories of Christmas celebrations that went terribly wrong. From the unexpected to the unimaginable, get ready to discover the darker side of Christmas. Before we begin, leave a like and let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a scary moment during Christmas? Our first story takes us to a small family gathering where the unexpected turned Christmas into a true nightmare. Story 1. The Feast That Never Happened. Chapter 1. The Perfect Eve. Snowflakes fell thickly, covering the Wilsons' small cabin in soft white. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey and spices filled the air, while the soft glow of the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls. It was a family tradition they cherished, spending Christmas away from the hustle and bustle of the city, surrounded only by the tranquility of the mountains and the warmth of being together. Mark, the youngest brother, looked out the window with impatience. At 17, he loved Christmas celebrations, but there was something about the stillness of that night that made him uneasy. The stack of firewood beside the fireplace was nearly gone, and with a confident smile, he volunteered to fetch more from the nearby forest. "I'll be back soon," he said, grabbing his coat and gloves. His mother insisted he take the lantern, but Mark just laughed. "I won't be long. The full moon lights everything outside." He closed the door behind him, and the biting cold swept into the room for a moment before fading away. The family settled back into the comfort of the interior, but as the minutes passed, Mark's absence began to weigh on them like a dark presence in the room. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. The minutes turned into almost an hour, and Mark still hadn't returned. At first, no one thought much of it. He could have gotten distracted admiring the snow-covered forest, or maybe was taking longer to carry the firewood. However, when his mother called his name from the window and only the echo answered, unease began to grow. His father put on a heavy coat and went out to search for him, followed by his older siblings, Tom and Evelyn. The forest seemed darker than usual, despite the full moon's glow. Mark's footprints were easy to follow at first, a clear trail leading toward the denser woods. "He hasn't gone far," Tom said, trying to calm the tension starting to show on everyone's faces. But a few meters later, the footprints began to grow spaced out, as if he had been running, and then they stopped abruptly. The snow around was untouched, with no signs of a fall or movement. It was as if Mark had simply vanished into thin air. Evelyn pointed to something on the ground, the lantern he had taken with him. It was standing upright, intact, but turned off. The silence of the forest, so deep and unchanging, seemed to suffocate any hope. That's when a strange sound echoed through the trees, a distant melody, resembling a Christmas carol, but off-key and slow, resonated for a moment before fading away. The father looked around, trying to identify the source of the sound, while Evelyn gripped the lantern tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to go back," he said, his voice firm, barely masking his panic. Maybe he's already returned to the cabin, but deep down they all knew something was terribly wrong. Chapter 3. The Dark Encounter. The trio walked back toward the cabin, but the silence surrounding them felt heavier than before. The unsettling melody they had heard still echoed in Evelyn's mind, a memory she couldn't erase. Their steps were cautious, and every sound no matter how small, made their hearts race. As they neared the edge of the forest, Tom suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, slowly turning around. The others stood still, their ears straining. It was a low sound, almost imperceptible, like something being dragged through the snow. They turned toward the sound and saw a faint light between the trees. It was different from the moonlight. It seemed to pulse gently, like a candle about to go out. "Mark?" Evelyn called, her voice choked with a mix of hope and fear. Without waiting for an answer, Tom began walking toward the light, but their father grabbed his arm. "Wait, this isn't right." But it was too late. The light pulled them in like a magnet, and they followed hesitantly until they reached a small clearing. In the center stood a hooded figure, facing away from them, holding something that looked like a scarf, the same one Mark had been wearing that night. "Hey, who are you?" their father shouted, trying to sound firm, but his voice betrayed his nervousness. The figure slowly turned its head, revealing a pale, almost non-existent face, shrouded in shadows. Before they could react, the light abruptly went out, plunging them into darkness. When the lanterns illuminated the area again, the figure had vanished, but Mark's scarf was lying on the ground, covered in snow. Their father picked it up with trembling hands, unable to speak a word. They knew they had to leave. Chapter 4. The Incomplete Christmas. The father, Tom, and Evelyn hurried back to the cabin, their quick steps leaving deep marks in the fresh snow. Their mother was at the door, her anxious eyes scanning the darkness. When she saw them return without Mark, her face twisted in despair. "Did you find him?" Her voice trembled. The father simply shook his head, handing her the scarf. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the piece of fabric as if it were her own child. The Christmas dinner remained untouched that night. The fireplace, once warm, seemed to lack the strength to heat the cabin. The silence was only broken by the mother's sobs and the sound of the wind howling outside. In the following days, searches were carried out across the mountain, but no trace of Mark was found aside from the scarf. For the Wilsons, that Christmas became a landmark of pain, a void that would never be filled. The story ends with Evelyn's voice, years later, narrating the events to her own children. She speaks of the distorted melody and the dark figure, warning them about the forest on snowy nights. "Remember," she would say, her eyes dark, "not everything lost in the snow is ever found." Story 2. The Ghostly Passenger. Chapter 1. The Christmas Journey. The snow fell gently on the deserted road as the car radio played Christmas songs. It was Christmas Eve, and the Hendersons were on their way to their grandparents' house, where they planned to spend the holiday. The father drove carefully around the icy curves, while the mother checked the map on her phone. In the back seat, the two children, Sam and Lily, played a game of trying to count how many snow-covered trees they could see through the window. "Are we almost there?" Lily asked, her tone of impatience making the father smile. "One more hour, sweetheart," he replied, "and there'll be hot chocolate waiting for us." The landscape outside was a never-ending white. The seclusion of the place felt cozy, yet slightly unsettling. The road was deserted, with no signs of other cars or any life, except for a fox that darted across the road ahead, disappearing into the forest. "Absolute silence around here," the mother remarked, glancing out the window. But that silence was deceiving. little did they know something or someone was patiently waiting further up the road. Chapter 2. The Stranger on the Side of the Road. The car's headlights illuminated something unexpected ahead. A solitary figure at the edge of the road. He seemed to be waving slowly, with strange and hesitant movements, as if asking for help. Who would be out here, in the middle of nowhere on a night like this? The mother asked, furrowing her brow. Maybe his car broke down. The father replied, slowing down. The children stopped playing in the back seat, curious about the silhouette approaching. When the car stopped, the headlights fully revealed the man. He was tall, wearing a shabby overcoat and a hat that barely shielded his head from the snow. His appearance was odd. The clothes seemed from another time, old-fashioned and out of place. The father lowered the window. "Do you need help, sir?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if evaluating the car. Then, without saying a word, he opened the back door and got in. "Hey, you can't just get in like that," the father protested, turning around. But the man only raised his hand, pointing ahead. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and raspy. "You'll never make it there." The silence in the car became suffocating. The father tried to hide his discomfort, but the children were visibly tense. "Where did you come from?" the mother asked, trying to sound calm. The man didn't answer. He just smiled, a disturbing smile, before turning his gaze back to the road. The father, nervous, started the car and continued driving, but a chilling sense of something wrong lingered in the air. Chapter 3. The Accident. The man remained silent throughout the drive, his gaze fixed on the road with an unsettling intensity. His eyes, partially hidden by the shadow of his hat, didn't blink, and his stiff posture seemed almost mechanical. The mother felt an increasing discomfort, but tried to stay calm for the children, who were fidgeting in the back seat. "Dad, don't you think it's weird he hasn't said anything else?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. The father hesitated before responding, trying to mask his unease. "Don't worry, sweetheart. He must be tired." But as they continued down the desolate road, the tension in the car only grew. The presence of the stranger seemed to weigh heavily on them, and the snow, which had once felt cozy, now seemed oppressive. Then, without warning, the man looked at the father and said, with an almost unsettling calm, "Now is the time." The car skidded. The father tried to maintain control of the steering wheel, but the icy road and the sudden pressure caused him to lose control. The vehicle slid to the side, crashing into a snowbank and almost going off the road. The impact was strong enough to send everyone jerking forward against their seatbelts. When the car finally stopped, there was silence, heavy and breathless. The man had vanished. He was no longer in the back seat. Trembling, the father quickly checked to make sure everyone was okay. The children were frightened, but unharmed. He just disappeared," the mother said, her voice weak. The father glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was no sign of the man on the road, only darkness and snow. Chapter 4. The Final Warning, 200 Words. The car was partially stuck in the snow, but fortunately no one was injured. The father tried to restart the engine, but the car didn't respond. The mother was visibly shaken, her eyes scanning the darkness. "We need to get out of here, now," the father said, trying to keep calm, though his voice trembled. Sam and Lily sat quietly in the back seat, both aware that something was terribly wrong. The feeling of being watched had never been so intense. The biting wind seemed to come from all directions, and the darkness appeared to swallow the road ahead. They started walking down the road, searching for help. With every step, the silence grew heavier, as if the night itself was watching them. When they were just a few meters from the car, a figure appeared in the distance. It was the man again, standing in the middle of the road, as if he had been waiting for them. He smiled, that same disturbing smile from before. "I told you wouldn't make it there, didn't I?" The father, terrified, shouted, "Who are you? What do you want from us?" But the man didn't answer. He simply vanished into the darkness, as if he had never been there. The Hendersons, now completely unnerved and fearing for their safety, decided to return to the car and wait until dawn. But in the silence of the night, they knew that road had changed them forever. Story 3. The Gift That Shouldn't Exist. Chapter 1. Christmas Morning. It was a cold Christmas morning when the Johnson family woke up, eager to open their presents. The house was decorated with sparkling lights, and the Christmas tree was filled with colorful packages. The scent of freshly baked cookies and hot coffee filled the air. The children, Emily and Lucas, were excited, jumping around the tree while their parents, Sarah and Mark, smiled at the joy their children brought. "Look, a present for you, Emily," Mark exclaimed, pointing to a larger package under the tree. Emily rushed over to open it, while Lucas was already focused on a smaller gift beside him. Then Lucas suddenly stopped. "There's one more here, but it's not in the right place." He pointed to a small box with a black ribbon, discreetly placed behind the tree as if it had been hidden. The box was different. The black ribbon stood out against the colorful decorations around it. Sarah frowned, but didn't pay much attention. "Probably a gift from a family friend," she said, trying to ease the mood. But something felt off. The gift had no name or label, which made hesitation creep over them. Still, curiosity got the better of them, and Sarah decided to open the box. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Object. Inside the box, the gift seemed simple at first glance. An antique clock with intricate designs was carefully wrapped in soft fabric. Sarah lifted it cautiously, examining its details. The dark metal of the clock was worn, but its structure remained solid. The hands moved slowly, but there was something odd. They were ticking backward. "What kind of clock is this?" Mark asked, frowning as he took the object. The mechanism seemed to work, but something about it felt off. Looking closer, Sarah noticed a delicate inscription on the back of the clock. "Your time is running out." The words sent a chill down her spine, but she tried to dismiss the feeling. "It must be a joke, maybe a gift from a friend trying to scare us," she said, attempting to lighten the mood. But when Sarah set the clock back on the table, things began to change. The air around them seemed heavier, as though time itself had slowed. Emily and Lucas, who had been playing near the tree, suddenly stopped. "I heard a whisper," Emily said, her wide eyes filled with fear. "In the kitchen, right behind me." Mark turned toward the kitchen, but there was nothing there. When he looked back, he noticed the reflection of the clock in the window. It showed a shadowy figure standing behind him, a faceless figure. "It's just a trick of the light." Sarah tried to reassure everyone, but her voice wavered. Chapter 3. The Disappearance. On Christmas night, while everyone gathered in the living room to share stories and toast, something sinister unfolded. The clock on the table began to hum softly, as though it had a life of its own. Its hands spun faster and faster, and the light in the room flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Sarah and Mark realized that time was flowing in an erratic, unnatural way. Suddenly, the clock's hands stopped abruptly. A sharp clicking noise echoed through the room, followed by a heavy, unsettling silence. Sarah glanced around and noticed Lucas staring blankly into the distance, his face pale. He whispered, "Mom, Dad, where are you?" Mark and Sarah turned to him in alarm, and that's when they realized Emily was no longer sitting on the couch. She had vanished without a trace. "Emily!" Mark shouted, leaping to his feet, his face contorted in terror. "Emily, answer me!" But his voice was swallowed by the growing darkness that now enveloped the house. The children began to cry as Sarah and Mark frantically searched the house, shouting Emily's name. Upstairs, Mark heard a strange noise coming from a room at the end of the hallway. He slowly approached, his heart pounding. When he opened the door, the sight before him was indescribable. Emily was there, but she wasn't the same. Her eyes were vacant, and she clutched the antique clock tightly, terror etched into her face. Then, the faceless figure emerged again from the shadows, holding the clock as though guarding it. Mark stumbled backward, tripping over the doorway, as Emily and the shadowy figure vanished into the darkness together. Chapter 4. The Curse of the Clock. Years passed, and the Johnson family never recovered from the terror of that fateful night. Emily was never seen again, and the clock, which had vanished along with her, was never found. Sarah and Mark tried to move on, but the loss of their daughter haunted them relentlessly. The clock, now a dark legend, disappeared as mysteriously as it had arrived. The children who survived that Christmas, Lucas and his younger sister, Diane, grew up with deep emotional scars. They could never forget the faceless figure or the clock. In their nightmares, the shadows always returned, carrying the chilling echo of, "Your time is running out." Stories of the clock began to spread, and soon many families started reporting strange experiences with gifts that inexplicably appeared in their homes during Christmas. A gift with a black ribbon, a clock spinning backward. Every family that received such a present was never the same again. It is said the clock reappears when least expected, bringing the inevitable with it. For those who find it, there is no escape. The Johnson story remains as a warning. Beware of unknown gifts during Christmas. 3 stories, 3 Christmas Eves that will never be forgotten. A ruined feast, a perilous road, and a cursed gift. What is it about Christmas time that awakens the darkest forces around us? Coincidence, or something beyond our understanding? Which of these stories scared you the most? And have you ever had a Christmas that went terribly wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Until next time, and remember, not every Christmas gift is wrapped with good intentions.